Clubhouse.
Jill, ask them what they think about supervillain.
That sounds better to me. More exciting.
Do you prefer saving America? How about saving the world?
Nope. It's saving America.
Welcome back to Pod Clubhouse's continuing coverage of The Boys. This is for Season 4, Episode 6. It was called Dirty Business, a name I think that might have a few different meanings given the various contexts available in this episode. But I thought the overriding theme of this episode had to be duality, because the concept of me versus the real me came up in a few different ways with a few different characters. And when you think about what they were saying, that other characters have been saying the same thing all season.
Yeah, I think that's a good theme of the episode, especially with like Victoria, Sage, even Hughie in this, and also the duality of dealing with the person you are or your feelings and things like that, and kind of like hiding that sense of yourself, I think is also sort of a theme in the show and this season for sure.
Every character has something that they're presenting and something that they're hiding, like people do.
That's pretty human.
Let's talk about Hughie. Hughie goes through a lot in this episode. I don't have a lot of questions exactly about Hughie.
Just comments and disgust.
Yeah, I mean, shit. Just signing up to go undercover and then that being the result. I mean, good God. Who could have foreseen a sex dungeon plus all that other stuff with Ashley and the cake and all that? It kept me guessing. It definitely kept me guessing. It kept me like, it's not that I'm prudish or anything, but still, once you get a couple seconds of naked ass on cake, you don't need 10 more, you know? It's
your line is just a few seconds of ass on cake.
Yeah. It burns in quite enough at that point.
Oh man.
So, but given that Hughie has had this situation, his dad died basically within a short amount of time because, you know, at the beginning of the episode, they are spreading his ashes out along the Made in Manhattan tour route. And then he has this, I think you could call that trauma. If you don't know what you're getting into, and then that scenario with the being strapped down, with the other things happening to you, the Tek Knight is about to cut you open. You have that ball gag in your mouth. Not just ball gag, but it's just that thing holding your mouth in that very uncomfortable position.
Yes.
I think you combine all that together. And at the end, he breaks. He says, I'm not okay. Does this equal that Hughie might be out of commission for some period of time? I mean, there's only 2 episodes to go after this. Hughie doesn't know that, but I don't know that you get to the finale of the season with Hughie just on the sidelines, especially since we've discussed that he may have a major role deciding how to facilitate Billy and Mike needing to be put out of his misery at some point.
I know in the last episode we were talking about how some of these storylines they've been fleshed out, but like in a not satisfying way.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've noticed this, but with Hughie in particular, while he's had a lot of things going on, I think he will definitely be part of the big finale with Butcher, and in general, I can't help but think like him and Starlight's storyline has also suffered a little bit in this season, because in the first couple of seasons, it was all about them kind of really hashing out, like if Hughie didn't do something if Starlight didn't do something, Hughie would get so upset, right? Like things like that. And I was like, the fact that she never went to go see his dad kind of irked me a little bit, where it felt out of character for them to be like, his dad was literally dying and Starlight was like, okay, well, I gotta go do this. And Hughie was just okay with that. And they never really talked about it.
That's a good point.
They've never had a conversation. Like, I just feel like it's kind of not what would have happened in the earlier seasons where they always would hash things out. And this is a pretty big deal. Like it's not just like, oh, he went to go do something. Like he was going to visit his dying dad. And she was like, well, I got to go do this other stuff. And he was like, okay, all good, you know? I don't know if that kind of struck you as weird. So in this episode where she's just like, oh, I don't think he's ready, but like they've never really had a conversation. It just felt like she was not treating him like a boyfriend in that way of like really being there for him. Like, no, you know, it just felt like they're kind of coworkers in a weird way.
And that kind of caught up with her at the end.
Yeah.
When she saw him for what he was going through, and she just held him. But you're right, they hadn't had anything like that because she's been putting out a lot of fires the whole season long, and there hasn't been. I mean, it's not like their relationship has wavered this season, but it hasn't strengthened either because they haven't had any time together.
Yeah, which I guess in that sense it's real where, you know, in relationships you can kind of like, oh, we're good in a certain foundation, and so you don't check on the person you're with, you know, and so maybe that's also they're in such a good place together that I think Starlight and Hughie in their own respective way have been like not really talking to each other because they know that they're good, but then it was in that moment where Hughie's like, oh, like Ashley did this thing, and it was actually really traumatizing. Like he wanted to pretend he was okay, and then he just couldn't hold it in, and then she was like, yeah, it was just that moment you realize like, oh, you didn't ask like your person, hey, are you doing okay? You know, like she just kind of took it for granted that, oh yeah, Hughie went through this crazy stuff, but like it's fine.
Right. At the mansion, Tek Knight's mansion, she knew physically when enough was enough. Just sort of like he'd been out of contact for too long for anything good to be still happening. It's not like she's totally disconnected from him, but she needed to fully come back around to emotionally reconnect.
And it's weird because I think like in Mother's Milk, I think it was in the last episode where Kimiko and him are, you know, kind of talking, and because he was like, hey, what's going on with you and Frenchie? And then, or what's going on with Frenchie? Because he, you know, he knew that they're too close. But then she's like, oh, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And then he's like, he doesn't like, you know, when she texts saying, I don't know, he's not talking to me. And then Mother's Milk is like, oh, then asked, are you okay? Like that was a very sweet moment where like I think a lot of the characters in this show don't ask that of each other. And I feel like that was a moment where like Annie never asked Hughie, hey, are you okay? She just assumed he was okay because he's been through so much with her and like just kind of took it for granted.
For people that have to go through such life and death stuff, to just treat it like they're coworkers at any old other normal place of work. You know, it's interesting how much a person can come to cope with and begin to treat as normal that outside of that context, everyone else would agree is highly not normal and not be able to just cope with were they thrown into it. But once you're there, you do kind of take for granted the other people that are in it with you. I think that's what you're describing.
We forget to just ask that like simple question of, hey, are you okay from that? Because which is it's so simple yet so powerful. And I think, and Hughie himself, I guess it was sort of like a growing moment in that way too, because like instead of kind of sucking it up, which I think he had been, he also allowed himself to finally just crack, and maybe not so much allow, but he just couldn't take it anymore. Especially after like that trauma of what he had been through in the tech cave. It's sort of just forced. He's like, what the fuck? You know, like he volunteered because I think he did want to take his mind off his dad's death, but he didn't think while he expected there to be some tension and it was going to be kind of, oh, I'm putting myself in harm's way. He didn't think it was going to be like that, obviously.
No.
And it just became this whole other thing that kind of was like, whoa, this was way too much, especially for what I'm going through.
Tek Knight is a character, I don't remember if he was earlier on The Boys, but he was in Gen V. He was basically a detective who had a TV show. The TV show was sort of like a true crime thing that he would go to wherever the mystery was and basically solve it in real life. And one of those places was the university where Gen V takes place. And he's just in one episode. The quirk at the end when he's threatening to cut Hughie open and have sex with the holes that he makes, that's the vulnerability, I guess, because Tek Knight seems to have it very together, especially with his power being able to put people at unease so much. He can focus on like how much your heartbeat is and how much you're sweating, and notice little Sherlock sort of things like stains on your clothes or the things you're holding, and be able to deduce correctly things about you from those things. It seems like he'd be very powerful to have on your side, but he has these weird sexual proclivities, and one of those things is that if he can be very attracted to random holes. And it doesn't matter what kind it is or where it is. If it strikes his fancy, then he'll need to try to have sex with it, even if it's like the air blower in the men's room, which they show in
Okay, in the Gen V.
yeah.
Okay.
They have like a greatest hits compilation of Tek Knight trying to have sex with various holes.
So it all makes sense because I haven't seen Gen V, so I didn't have any context. So I was like very much like, oh my God.
Yeah. Well, at least those were inanimate holes, which I don't know. Somehow that's maybe better than cutting open a person and making other holes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is
I
a
don't know.
mature podcast this week.
Yes.
All right. So moving to other members of
To
the boys.
each their hole.
Do you think Frenchie will ever come out? I mean, I kind of think they're going to need to go in and get him out for some Frenchie specific purpose. But at this point, do you think he'll come out on his own?
This might be reaching a little bit, but given the whole Tek Knight owns all the prisons sort of thing that they're like, you know, the internment camps that they're alluding to, do you think that by Frenchie being in the prison, is that like an inside, or do you think that could be tied to keeping him there? Besides, maybe that actor has something else he's doing and they just need to like put him on ice for a little bit.
Oh, wow. That's a really good call. I didn't even make the connection.
Yeah, it just feels odd. I mean, or it just feels weirdly too close that we just found out that the whole reason they wanted Tek Knight, that Homelander and Sage wanted him, is to use the prison system, and then Frenchie just happens to be in the prison.
Then with only 7 and 8 left, and this big plan described at the billionaires' social for imprisoning political dissidents in those prisons, then you could see where Frenchie, they may not need to revisit him until next season. Because if they're going to let that plan happen, which would be very dramatic to turn the world on its head with Newman in the White House. If anyone's wondering, the 25th Amendment is in fact the one that puts the vice president into power upon the death of a president. That's what it does. So yeah, I didn't even think of that, man. Yeah, the inside man when the whole prison thing goes down.
Because then maybe he'll be able to break out, I don't know, to kind of do some sort of inside thing. But I just feel like it just feels too oddly like on the nose of like prison and then Frenchie in prison.
That's why you're here. Because
that's why I'm
missed
here.
It. Yeah. On the outside of the prison, had that panic attack. And externally, he can see that this job is killing Butcher very physically, you know? Being leader of their team drove Butcher to, I mean, other things in addition, but drove him to such madness that he killed himself in slow motion with Temp V. Are they setting the stage to show pull back? I don't even know what the alternative is, but just to pull back and maybe focus on family, or his focus on Janine and her kind of weird infatuation with Homelander is enough to overcome the physical problems that he's giving himself.
It feels like a little bit of a foreshadowing, because one of the boys has not died yet, like we've talked about, right? So I do feel like they're setting up either Hughie could be the one that would die, kind of to just be ultimately tragic, which
Yeah.
I mean, I can't put it past the boys, but I feel like that's too easy to pinpoint. I think they're going to save him for season 4. So I think Mother Smoke could, yeah, sorry, season 5. But I just feel like Mother's Milk is on the chopping block. Maybe the panic attacks and this, and maybe it's sort of it's always been him and Butcher and Hughie. You know, Hughie and Butcher have the connection, but Mother's Milk and Butcher have a really big connection as well. And he's sort of like lightened up to Butcher in the last episode of like, as much as he was trying to fight, like, you're not on this team, whatever, and then he brought him back in, and he's like, you're a motherfucker with a heart. Like he understands where Billy's coming from. He doesn't agree the way he does it, and I think now that he also is learning, like, oh, being a leader is really hard, especially with the boys, especially with all the stuff that's going on. He has a lot of empathy for Billy now. I think still does not agree with the way, and once he finds out what he's done to Samir, I think we'll probably be like, oh, fuck that, you know. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it just feels like maybe he will have to kind of, especially because the whole thing was Mother's Milk has an OCD issue, and in the last episode it was alluded to that Janine might have it too. I think that could be the reason. If he were to pull back, it would be because he needs to take care of himself and also take care of Janine, because she has whatever he has.
Yeah, OCD doesn't usually grip most sufferers quite that way, but I could see where it could. Especially, you know, he had
The stress.
He had that indignation with the suppository whatever earlier in the episode. There's not enough Purell in the world.
It was disgusting, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it had keyed him up having to do that stuff. It all gets back to butt stuff this season so far. All right. So while they're at the soiree, there's that moment when Homelander decides, with or without Sage, he's moving forward, although he's not equipped. He's good at giving speeches, but he's not good at really answering questions.
Oof, yeah.
So Newman steps in because Sage is still rebuilding her brain. Do you think that Newman actually buys into the crap that she said to the billionaires? Or do you think that's more like, I've got to get these people's support to get what I want, and I'll just say anything in this room?
I think it was a little bit of that. I think it was the speech, you know, her and Sage had talked earlier about, like, because Victoria was very much like, oh, I have to talk to these, you know, a-holes, you know, like just mansplaining folks and just like having to suck up. And she was just not having it. And then Sage is sort of like, you know, I could cure cancer, and I did, and talks about her story with her grandmother and how, like, oh, it doesn't even matter if I'm the smartest person in the room if you can't sway anybody else. Basically, she was saying, like, they just saw me as a dumb person, even though she was like the smartest kid.
Yeah.
A dumb girl to not be listened to. And so in a room full of men, it was basically sort of like, you got to trick them into thinking that they're the smart ones or something like that. I feel like that was and take the power in that way and tell them what they want to hear. And so I think Victoria saw that as like, okay, this is my moment to sort of, I hate this, but like, I just have to tell them what they want to hear. And I guess I'll take my power and use it. And also, she didn't want Homelander probably to laser everybody as well.
It's a tough balance with that guy.
Because he hates feeling stupid. And
Yeah,
he was feeling, and he definitely was getting that. And it was like, it was also kind of very ballsy of all the people in that room that are not soups to question Homelander in that way. So I was getting a little bit like, oh, is he just going to like laser everybody? But then, yeah, she stepped up and then he kind of took it over. And I think she liked it. She's talked about having to hide her identity. She has to cover up all her tracks. It must have been kind of freeing too. Like, she is a smart person to have gone that far. Soup or not soup, no soup. So I think for her to like, it probably felt also nice to use the abilities she does have and not just head popping ones.
Right. I mean, she's a successful politician on her own merits without relying on anything power related. Well, I mean, occasionally she did here and there, but I mean, behind the scenes, the voting part of it was on her own. So yeah, that is her part of her superset is the gift of gab. But I have trouble believing that she's actually going to make good on some of this stuff. If she's seated in the Oval Office and she gets that level of power, I think she would have a change of heart on some of these things. As long as you can keep the billionaires happy with the whatever it is billionaires need, easing of regulations and restrictions and taxes and that kind of stuff, then all that other ideological stuff that gets tossed into political conversations, I think they care less about those things than they do about as long as the money keeps coming in.
Yeah, I mean, everything that she said, I think it wasn't necessarily a thing she believes in. I think it was just to make sure that the billionaires didn't get zapped by Homelander and also to get them on their side. So whenever she does get in power, who knows what she'll do? Because all she cares about is making sure soups are okay and to control Homelander.
So to this day, or to this episode, what do we suppose Homelander's big plan is that they've revealed so far? We know that they want to unseat Singer, probably through some kind of assassination. I don't know how that works, if he needs to be sworn in as president and then she can ascend to the presidency because she gets sworn in at pretty much the same time, or if they can do it while they're in that in-between period between November and January where they are now. And then after that, whatever happens with Singer, I guess doesn't particularly matter. But once she's sworn in, then they have a series of laws and things that need to be changed or repealed. That's part of it. And then we know about the prison camps. And even though Tek Knight dies by the end of the episode, I don't know why that part of the plan wouldn't continue on with somebody else calling those particular shots. Some other Knight family representative who's proud of their long history in prison maintenance administration. What else am I missing from the Homelander Rebuild America plan?
It was clear to an extent of like what he would use the prisons for, but I mean, it would just be people who are against soups or people who are against him, like the Starlighters and things like that. But to what end, right? Because it's like at some point, I don't know, is it just him having all the adoration of the people and like he just wants to basically make it a nation of Homelander fans. So that way he can never have those triggers of feeling inadequate. Maybe that's what it is, but I just don't see how that can be it.
Maybe that's what Sage is there for once her brain grows back, is to keep the plot moving for whatever's meant to happen. So it's like a pro-soup type agenda. They remember part of it was that, at least Homelander wanted anyway, that Newman should reveal her true nature once she becomes president.
Yeah.
Although they didn't discuss that in this room with these guys.
We still don't know what Sage wants because we know that she knows things that she's not telling Homelander. So she's not being upfront with him. Like she knows that A-Train is the real, I mean, still speculative, but the tells of her kind of making these little comments
At this point,
to him.
She knows, yeah. It didn't just run out of here, right?
No, yeah. So she knows and is not giving him up. So I'm like, what is that reason?
Well, and like she's emboldened the Deep. Now Deep is talking new noir into beating people up because it makes you feel good.
I think her talking to Victoria in this episode is probably a big clue, of that whole speech she gave to her of like, I'm super smart, but what does it mean? Like if you can't puppet other people to do what you want, if they don't take you seriously, even if you are the smartest person in the world. So she's found this other way to do it, I guess, or trying to. It's funny that she also wants to be stupid and sometimes and just turn that off. This one was involuntary because obviously Mother's Milk shot her and didn't know that was going to happen. But yeah, I also thought like, oh, is Homelander going to just laser her after that?
Yeah.
For leaving him like feeling kind of stupid. So I was like, oh, is this it for her?
Well, he may not know the extent of what her power does. At the very end there, the firecracker scene was starting to be sort of an accounting of what the hell just happened. It turned into something else. But that was his intent, was to figure out what in the hell is going on with the team here. Can we take Firecracker at her word that she will do anything for Homelander and that's it? Because she doesn't know the lesson from Elizabeth Shue's character of trying to use the position of the lactation specialist as a way to exert control over Homelander, and that ultimately not paying off. Do you think she's just happy to let him do his thing every so often and that's it?
I think she really wanted that loyalty. I think because of like she's kind of I mean, as they all are, but kind of a broken character and really wants also that love. So I think she wants that from Homelander, like to really give loyalty to somebody, whether it's her country or whatever, but like seems to really want to do that. And I don't know, it feels different. It doesn't feel like she's doing it to manipulate him. I mean, yes, in a way, but I do feel like she wants to do it for him to help him in whatever he's trying to do. But it also just seems a little too convenient. Like she's not that dumb either.
No, she's crafty.
Yeah. I don't know. I think at this point, we don't have anything else to go on. So I mean, she just wants to align herself with Homelander and maybe the winning team. So she doesn't want to be on the bad side. So I think maybe that's how I read it, is like she's just willing to do anything to make sure she's on Homelander's like good side. And also not just his good side, but like really inside.
Yeah.
And not feeling inferior because like she said, I've always looking outside. I've always been like the outsider. She grew up poor, that kind of thing. So I think she is really just wanting to be part of the team.
So the moment crying in the bathroom at the mansion, was that about being dismissed by Homelander or just
by Sage?
By Sage. And
by not being the one that
he did brush her off.
He did, but it's like she couldn't give him something that, like Sage is giving him that, like the plan to kind of get his power. And I think that's when she figured out like, oh, I need to give him something that he really wants or needs, and did that whole, the milk thing.
The milk thing.
The milk thing.
Oh, wow. I read that scene a little bit differently, just the feeling. I like your read better than mine, because mine was more she's what it looks like when a person who doesn't go to billionaire parties goes to billionaire parties. They don't know their way around. They don't know the food. They don't know the etiquette. They don't know how to act. And that was even amongst her super friends, they didn't even want to hang out with her. So she was all alone. That was how I read the crying at the mansion, but I think you're closer to right. For me, the big character in this show, even though a lot of neat stuff happened in this episode, the big character's gotta be Billy Butcher. And the big
reveal,
beautiful mind reveal that I didn't see coming at all. Did you?
I did not, and it was pretty awesome. And now in hindsight, it makes sense that like Becca is the good of him, so he would have had to have this bad, but like it was just so clever, and I really liked it. I really liked that reveal. We knew he was losing it with him seeing Becca, but when I was almost like when Jeffrey D. Morgan, like, and he's like the perfect person to play that character as well. But when he like turns over, he's like, "Shut up, Becca," or whatever. It was like, what? It's like, what is happening here? And it was like, oh my God.
I knew what was happening instantly when he said that, but not until that moment. And it makes perfect sense, like you just described. Just he comes in as the yin to Becca's yang. We both need you to save Ryan, but we have different motivations completely. I want you to whisk him away and give him a peaceful life, or I want you to use him to train up and kill Homelander. I don't know. It totally works for me. There might be some people out there complaining about it. I have no idea. But this viewer was dropping food out of my mouth because my jaw was gaping open with, oh my God, kind of reaction. We mentioned the theme of duality at the beginning of the podcast episode. And in a couple episodes ago, we had seen that Homelander had that fractured psyche represented by the mirror and the different aspects, facets of himself talking to him. And this seems to be a similar mechanism to that. Is this another attempt by the filmmakers to parallel these two characters as the two that this show is ultimately all going to boil down to needing to have it out? Just the mirror reflections of each other.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't thought about it that way, but I do think that's a really good insight to like the parallel that they're both going through. And also just in general of they're also very lonely characters. Like anyone who's been by themselves, like you talk to yourself in a way, right? Like even if you're not like talking out loud, you talk in your mind to whatever you call it, whatever you think is in like conscience, subconscious, like we all have those conversations with ourselves, like, oh, should I go eat that thing? Should I do this? Like it's weird because you are by yourself, but you do have this like other voice in your head, sometimes several voices. The good part, like all the various people that we have inside of us that are kind of like, oh, you should go do this. Oh, no, you shouldn't. That's going to be scary. Oh, blah, blah, blah. So I feel like that's an extension of that in a very, in the very boysy world. But I also feel like to me, it just felt very lonely too, because these two characters don't really have anybody else. Like Billy had Becca, and that was probably the only person he could but he doesn't have her anymore. And it just made me sad too when it was revealed that Joe was also a figment of his imagination, that he didn't help, he actually left to die there. And so it was like sort of also this guilty conscience that he has, like he didn't help Becca and he didn't help Joe. And then Homelander comes at it from a very just sad little kid as well that was tortured. It also makes them very much a wild card, because if they're having these voices in their head of all facets, good, bad, crazy in Homelander's case, it doesn't bode well for anybody coming along for the ride, because they're such wild cards.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Is it, how do we feel that our hero, quote unquote, has the same seeming condition as the villain?
Well, Billy is also very much in the gray. Like, I don't think he's necessarily a good guy. He's done questionable things. He literally just chopped off a guy's leg because he wanted to force him to make a cure. Like, while he is wanting a cure to kill Soups like Homelander, it very much feels like a Homelander thing if it were in the opposite way. And almost even worse, because at least Homelander puts people out of their misery in a way, and he's keeping him alive. So it's almost like he's torturing this poor person, which is worse in the name of good, so it's also muddled. But now that we know that Kessler was a figment of his imagination, I don't know, in my eyes, it makes Billy kind of very much a wild card and scary, just as scary as Homelander. Because you can't trust him. Like, the character now is like, you can't trust. We as an audience can't trust him, and he can't trust himself.
And the other boys' team members, I don't think, can trust him. Like, they were like, where is he? Nobody knows. Mm-hmm. They could have used him. There was certain things that his talents might have been more applicable for, but he was incommunicado. So what are you going to do? He's not going to be welcomed with open arms next time he shows up, I bet.
Yeah, especially Hughie.
Yeah. There was a moment before the big reveal, when Becca said, if you kill Homelander, you'll create another. Do you suppose she means Ryan, or just like some other superhero will come along and fill that void? Because I read it as, if you kill Ryan's dad without doing everything the best way possible, then Ryan's going to see it as, you killed my dad, and enable Ryan to go down the dark path, choose the dark side. There won't even be a choice for him. It'll be obvious what to do.
Yeah, I think in terms of Becca's thing, I think it is that. I think that's why he's trying to find this virus, so that can kind of be an excuse, right? Like, or not an excuse, but sort of a hide of, maybe in Ryan's eyes, like, he can kind of like hide that, like, oh, well, there was a virus and I didn't know what, something, instead of him having to kill Homelander himself, which, obviously he can't do anyway, but maybe that can kind of like fool Ryan a little bit, if that's what his intention is.
Well, if he's not on board with this airborne super virus that'll kill every Soup, and he can't physically take down Homelander, then where do you suppose that leaves him at this point?
They put it out there already, so that now they have to do it. Because, nothing gets put out there. He can't just be like, okay, never mind, let me just find a new way. I think he will go down that path. But now that it's going to kill Ryan, I don't know. That it could kill Ryan. Who knows? And his friends too. Like, as much as he doesn't like Starlight, I think he doesn't want her to die, because that would mean also doing something bad to Hughie, who he does care about, even if he won't admit it. So it just has so much, so many implications. But I guess the one thing that even if Billy doesn't go through with it, I don't think that they were the only ones that knew about it. So I feel like maybe that's where Stan comes in. You know, maybe he knows about it.
Good call. The Stan card. We were wondering about what his possible use might be in the rest of the season, rest of the show. He was sort of like the Nick Fury of Vought. He knew where all the bodies were buried.
Or maybe he knows how to kill Homelander without killing everybody else. Because obviously Victoria and Zoe would die, and I don't think he would want that either.
It does seem like if there was such knowledge, its existence would rest with only a few. Maybe even just a one. Sort of, you know, when RoboCop goes to arrest the boss at OCP, he can't do it because there's a back door programmed into RoboCop that won't let him do it. Well, maybe there's a similar thing in Homelander. They thought maybe it could have been that need for adoration, but maybe it's got to be something more physical that Homelander may not even know himself that he is susceptible to.
Yeah. I mean, there has to be. Every superhero has something. So, but if he has it, that means Ryan would have it. Or possibly he could have it different because he was a born superhero. But that will also put Billy in a conundrum of that mission to save Ryan. So if he finds something that can kill Homelander, which he already did, this global pandemic against soups, is he going to use it? Or is he going to let his love for Becca kind of win and saving Ryan because that was her last wish?
I think he's not going to be a cunt. whatever that means is up to him, though.
Yeah. I will say though, it was a good. You know, this episode was really fun in that way, like these little plot points and things that kind of got things going. So I do think they're kind of, it built up like the last two episodes, 7 and 8. Like, I feel like it kind of put us in a good spot to kind of like, okay, 7 needs to be a lot more action and like maybe moving forward one of the plots that was built in this one. And then 8 is obviously the finale. So I feel like it kind of, the boys really delivered on this episode in that way, like setting us up for kind of gearing us up and not like leading us on again, like as a filler episode.
No, that reveal was big time. That was a big deal.
That felt like a Game of Thrones early on, like season 9 episode out of 10.
Right. Yeah. That, oh my God, they've been setting this up the whole time kind of reveal. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you as usual, Kat. I learned some new ways to look at some of the stuff that I missed, so I'm glad to have you along. If you enjoyed this podcast, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to it on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you found it. If you have a question or a comment for Kat or I, come to podclubhouse.com and leave a comment on this podcast or just anywhere. It doesn't matter. We'll find it and we will get back to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening. This has been an original Pod Clubhouse production. Pod Clubhouse is a podcast network dedicated to encouraging collaboration among podcasters and friends to bring a fresh voice and diverse perspective on a wide array of content. Please visit and leave a comment for us at podclubhouse.com. Rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast feeds on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find us at Pod Clubhouse. Our DMs are always open, and we'd love to hear from you.
Pod Clubhouse.